Sometimes the cruelest thing we do is nothing at all. We cross the street, we look away, we tell ourselves it's not our problem. And maybe that's why this story matters now, because in a world that keeps spinning faster, we've forgotten what it means to stop, to kneel in the dust, to offer a hand when everyone else has turned their back. This isn't my story, but it needs telling. Late August, 1883, West Texas. The freight wagon lurched to a halt in the town square, dust blooming around its wheels. The smell hit first horse dung baking in the sun, tobacco spit drying on wooden planks, and something else. Fear, maybe, or shame. The driver climbed down, spat a stream of brown juice into the dirt, and walked to the back. He grabbed someone by the arm and shoved hard. She hit the ground like a 50-pound sack of flour dropped from a loading dock. Didn't get up. The crowd on the boardwalk froze, arms crossed, mouths shut. A small boy pointed, and his mother jerked his hand down so hard he yelped. The Apache woman lay there, face pressed into the dirt, torn calico dress riding up past her knees, one eye sealed shut with dried blood the color of rust, hands curled inward like bird claws. Flies circled, landed on her shoulder. She was breathing, barely. Before we continue, please leave a like and subscribe. Let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. Thomas Garrett stood outside the mercantile, 50-pound flour sack balanced on his shoulder. He'd been about to load it when the wagon rolled in. Now he stood there, watching. The driver kicked dust onto the woman's back. Traded her for flour and nails. Ain't mine no more. He climbed back onto the wagon seat, snapped the reins. Wagon wheels creaked. The rig rolled away down Main Street, leaving twin ruts in the dirt. Nobody moved. Thomas set the flour sack down, slow. The burlap scraped against the wooden planks. Loud in the silence. He studied her. Torn calico. Faded blue with little flowers that might have been pretty once. One eye swollen shut, the skin around it purple-black, splitting at the edge where the bruise was oldest. Her hands were wrong. Fingers bent inward, knuckles scabbed. Defensive posture. Old habit. Likely learned the hard way. She was breathing, though. He could see her ribs moving under the thin fabric, each breath shallow and careful, like deeper ones cost too much. The sheriff leaned against the jail door frame 30 feet away, thumbs hooked in his belt, arms crossed, watching. His boots stayed planted right where they were. Behind Thomas. The mercantile door opened, closed, hinges squealing. Mrs. Hendricks and another woman whispered, voices carrying in the still air. He caught the word savage and the phrase asking for trouble. Thomas's jaw worked. He looked at the woman in the dirt again, at the flies crawling on her, then at the sheriff, who was studying his fingernails now like they were mighty interesting. Then at the crowd on the boardwalk, 15, maybe 20 people, men in work clothes, women in Sunday hats even though it was Thursday, all standing there like they'd paid admission to a traveling show. His boots scraped as he stepped off the boardwalk. The sound cut through the silence clean as an axe through kindling. He walked toward her. Not fast. Deliberate. Each step loud in the quiet. Dust puffed up around his heels, hung in the air. The sun hammered down on his neck, sweat already soaking through his shirt collar. He stopped beside her. His bad knee popped when he knelt the left one that always gave him trouble when weather was fixing to change. She didn't move, didn't even flinch. Can you stand? Nothing. Just the rasp of her breathing and the buzz of flies. He waited. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple, stung his eye. He blinked it away. One fly landed on her bare ankle. She didn't brush it off. Got work if you want it, he said. Food, your choice. Still nothing. Behind him, someone muttered something about fool's errand. Boot heels shifted on wood. But nobody came closer. He extended his hand, palm up, not grabbing, just there, waiting. Calluses thick across his palm from rope and reins. Dirt under his fingernails from morning chores he hadn't finished. Her good eye opened, just a slit. Dark brown, almost black. It tracked to his hand, stayed there for 3 heartbeats, then moved away, focusing on something past his shoulder, then came back, slower this time. Her fingers twitched, just barely. A tremor that might have been intentional, or might have been her body trying to remember how to move. And that's when he saw it. The thing that made his chest go tight and his throat close up. She wasn't deciding whether to trust him. She was deciding whether she wanted to get up at all. The buckboard jolted over ruts in the road. Every bump sent pain shooting through her ribs sharp, then dull, then sharp again. She gripped the wooden seat with both hands, knuckles going white. Thomas Garrett didn't speak, just drove, reins loose in his hands, eyes on the horizon where heat made the air shimmer and dance. The town shrank behind them until it was nothing but a smudge of brown against all that empty land. She watched him from the corner of her good eye. His face was weathered like old leather left too long in the sun. Lines cut deep around his mouth and eyes. 40, maybe older. Gray showing at his temples, more in the stubble on his jaw. He favored his left leg when he'd climbed onto the wagon old injury. The way he moved careful around it, protecting it without thinking. He hadn't touched her more than necessary, just helped her up. One hand under her elbow, gentle but firm. Let go the second she was steady enough to stand on her own. The sun hammered down. Sweat trickled between her shoulder blades, following the curve of her spine, stinging where the fabric rubbed against raw skin she couldn't remember getting. The wagon rolled on. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. No landmarks she recognized. Just scrub grass and mesquite and empty sky so blue it hurt to look at. Finally. He turned the wagon off the main road, a narrow track, barely visible through the brush. Mesquite branches scraped the wagon's sides. Grasshoppers burst from the weeds, clicking and whirring. Then she saw it. Adobe house, small and square, sitting low against the land like it had grown there. Thick mud brick walls that would keep the heat out when the sun was high. Split-rail corral beside it, rails weathered gray. Chickens scattered as they approached, squawking and flapping, kicking up little clouds of dust. A brown and white dog stood up from the porch, tail wagging slow and uncertain. Thomas pulled the wagon to a stop, set the brake with a creak of wood and metal, climbed down, moving stiff. She stayed where she was, hands still gripping the seat. He walked around to her side, didn't reach up, just stood there, looking at the ground like he was studying something in the dirt. Bunkhouse is there. He pointed to a smaller building 30 feet from the main house. Boards sun-bleached and splitting. Used to be for hired hands. She slid off the seat. Her legs nearly gave out when her feet hit the ground. She locked her knees, stayed upright through sheer will. The world tilted, then settled. He walked toward the bunkhouse without checking if she followed. She did, keeping distance between them, 6 feet, maybe 8. Close enough to hear his boots in the dirt. Far enough to run if she needed to. Inside one room. Narrow bed against the far wall with a straw tick mattress. She could smell it from the doorway, dust and mouse droppings and old straw that needed changing. Wool blanket folded at the foot. Gray and moth-eaten in places, but clean. Tin wash basin on a small table. Crack running down one side in a lightning bolt pattern. One window, no curtain. Just 4 panes of wavy glass that made the world outside look underwater. Pine board walls with gaps where daylight showed through in thin, bright lines. No lock on the door. Her throat went tight. She swallowed once, twice. It didn't help. Thomas stood in the doorway, not coming in, giving her space. "I'll bring food. Water." He paused, hat in his hands now, turning it by the brim. "You need a few days, that's fine. Take what you need." He left, boots crunching across the hard-packed yard. The dog barked once friendly sound, not warning, then quiet, except for chickens muttering to themselves and the creak of the windmill turning slow in the breeze she couldn't feel. She moved to the bed, sat down slow, testing if her legs would hold the lowering. The straw crackled under her weight, loud as gunfire in the quiet room. She touched the blanket rough wool under her fingertips, but clean. No blood. No stains she could see in the dim light. Her hands were shaking. Had been shaking since the wagon. Since before the wagon. She pulled them into her lap, squeezed them together until they stopped. Through the window, she could see him walking back from the main house. He carried something wrapped in cheesecloth, a canteen slung over his shoulder, leather strap dark with water stains. He set them on the step outside her door. Didn't knock, just backed away slow, hands loose at his sides, empty. Turned and walked to the barn without looking back. She waited, counted to 100 in her head, then stood and opened the door a crack, just wide enough to see. The yard was empty, just chickens pecking in the dirt and that dog sprawled in the shade under the porch. She brought the food inside quick, closed the door, sat on the bed with everything in her lap. Jerky wrapped in cheesecloth. She unwrapped it, careful 3 strips of dark meat. Salt crusted on the edges, cold cornbread in a tin, crumbly and dense. The canteen was full. She could hear water sloshing when she picked it up, feel the weight of it. The jerky was tough as boot leather. She tore off a small piece with her teeth, had to work it with her molars before she could swallow. Tasted like salt and smoke and something else she couldn't name. Her stomach cramped hard. She forced herself to keep chewing, to swallow, to take another bite. The cornbread was dry, turned to powder in her mouth. She ate it anyway, washing it down with water from the canteen. The water was warm, tasted like metal and minerals, but she drank until her stomach felt heavy and tight. When she finished, she set the empty cheesecloth aside, wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. Then she just sat there. The sun moved across the floor in a slow line of light, dust motes floating in it, spinning lazy like they had all the time in the world. She could hear him outside somewhere, hammering something. The sound echoed across the empty land, regular as a heartbeat. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. As the light faded from gold to orange to purple, she lay down on the bed. Didn't pull the blanket over herself. Just lay there on her side. Facing the door, knees pulled up, hands tucked against her chest. No lock on the door. She curled inward tighter, body remembering this position even if her mind didn't want to. Her ribs ached. Her eye throbbed. The cut on her lip had opened again. She could taste copper. Outside, the dog barked. Footsteps crossed the yard, slow and heavy. A door opened somewhere, closed with a soft thud. Then silence. Complete and absolute, except for the wind in the mesquite and a coyote yipping somewhere far off. She stared at the door, at the space where a lock should be but wasn't. Her good eye burned. She blinked, once, twice, kept blinking, and realized something that made her chest go cold and her breath catch. She didn't know which was worse, that she couldn't lock him out, or that she couldn't lock herself in. She woke before dawn, No clock, just her body knowing when darkness would lift, the way animals know, the way people who've had to survive learn. Through the window, the sky was still black, stars sharp as broken glass, cold and distant. The air coming through the gaps in the walls smelled like dust and creosote, and something green she couldn't name. She sat up, her ribs screamed. She pressed a hand against them, breathed shallow until the pain dulled to an ache she could carry. The borrowed men's clothes were folded outside her door. She'd found them yesterday evening: cottonwork shirt with buttons missing, canvas trousers with patches on both knees. Too big. She'd rolled the cuffs, cinched the waist with a piece of rope she'd found hanging on a nail inside the bunkhouse. She dressed in the dark. Pulled on the oversized boots he'd left her feet slid around inside them with every step, heels lifting, toes jamming forward. Outside, the air was cool. Would be hot soon, she could feel it coming already, that pressure building even in the pre-dawn quiet. She walked toward the main house, stopped 20 feet away. Uncertain. Light showed through the window, yellow and flickering. Lamplight. She heard the scrape of metal on metal, stove door opening, wood being fed in piece by piece, the clank of a poker stirring coals, then the door shutting with a soft clang. She waited, arms wrapped around herself even though she wasn't cold. The house door opened. Thomas stepped out, carrying a wooden bucket. He saw her, stopped mid-step, one boot still on the threshold. They looked at each other across the yard. Neither spoke. He gestured toward the corral with the bucket. "Need to fix that fence before the heat comes up." His voice was rough. Morning voice, not fully awake yet. "Kitchen garden's by the house if you want to work there." He walked past her. Didn't wait for an answer. Didn't ask if she wanted to work. Just told her where things were if she chose to. She watched him go. He limped worse in the morning that left legs stiff and careful until he worked the tightness out. Each step deliberate. Weight shifted to the right side. She turned toward the house, found the garden along the east side, where it would catch morning sun before the afternoon heat killed everything. Small plot, maybe 20 feet square, probably less. Tomato plants on wooden stakes, leaves curling inward from heat stress, squash sprawling between rows, yellowing at the edges where the vines were giving up, bean poles with dried vines clinging to them, brown and brittle as old paper, weeds everywhere, thick as the crops, thistle and bindweed and something with tiny yellow flowers that had gone to seed. She knelt. The dirt was hard, cracked in geometric patterns like broken pottery. She dug her fingers in anyway, found the root of a thistle, pulled. It broke off in her hand. She dug deeper, got under it, pulled again. This time it came up whole, dirt clinging to the root ball in clumps. She tossed it aside, found another weed, pulled. The sun climbed. Sweat started running down her back, soaking into the too big shirt. Her swollen eye throbbed with each heartbeat. She could feel her pulse in it, steady and insistent. She ignored it, kept pulling weeds from the corral. She heard the rhythmic thunk of a hammer on wood. He was working the fence, replacing a broken rail. The sound carried in the still morning air, regular as a clock ticking. She cleared around the first tomato plant, moved to the second, the third. An hour passed, maybe more. Time felt different here, measured in rows cleared, not minutes counted. She heard his footsteps before she saw him, looked up. He stood at the edge of the garden, hammer hanging from one hand. Sweat had soaked through his shirt in dark patches. He studied the cleared patch, the pile of pulled weeds wilting in the sun. "Garden looks better," he said. She said nothing. Dirt packed under her fingernails, ground into the creases of her palms. He nodded once. turned and walked back to the corral. She went back to work. By noon, the heat was crushing, not just hot brutal, the kind that made breathing feel like work. Sweat ran into her good eye, stinging. The swelling around her bad eye had spread down her cheek. She could feel it pulling tight when she moved her jaw, taste something metallic when she swallowed. The hand pump squealed as he worked it. Water splashed into the trough, clear and cold from deep underground. She stood up. Her knees popped like kindling breaking. She'd been kneeling for hours. He washed his hands under the pump, scrubbed them with a bar of lye soap the color of old bone, worked it into a thin lather, rinsed, dried them on his trousers. Then he looked at her, jerked his head toward the house. Didn't say anything, just the gesture. She followed, kept 6 feet between them, far enough to run, close enough to hear his boots in the dirt. Inside was cooler. Adobe walls a foot thick, holding back the worst of the heat. The air smelled like wood smoke and old coffee and something cooking beans. Maybe. The kitchen was small. Cast iron stove against one wall, still radiating warmth like it had a life of its own. Rough wooden table with 2 chairs, one on each side. Tin plates and cups hanging on nails driven into the wall, dented and scratched from years of use. He pulled food from a cloth-covered basket on the counter. Cold biscuits, hard as river stones. Butter in a crock, sweating in the heat. Tin pot with leftover rabbit stew from yesterday. Congealed fat floating on top in white islands. He sat down, started eating. Fast, mechanical. The way a man eats whose forgotten food is meant to be tasted, who just needs fuel to keep working. She sat in the other chair, took a biscuit, broke off a small piece with fingers that wouldn't stop trembling. Her stomach cramped the second she swallowed. Hard, like a fist closing. She forced herself to take another bite. He finished before she was halfway through. Stood up, carried his plate to the wash basin in the corner, just a wooden bucket with a dipper hanging on the side. "Garden's coming along," he said, not looking at her, looking at the plate he was washing. He dried his hands on a rag hanging from a nail, walked to the door, stopped in the doorway, still not looking at her. "There's more if you're hungry. Help yourself." He walked out, screen door slapping shut behind him. She sat there, biscuit crumbling in her hands, butter melting on her fingers. The dog appeared in the doorway, brown and white, one ear standing up, the other flopping down. It had a stick in its mouth, gnarled mesquite branch about as long as her forearm. It dropped the stick at her feet, sat down, tail sweeping the floor in wide arcs, stirring up dust. She looked at the stick, at the dog, at those brown eyes watching her with something she couldn't name. The dog's tail swept faster. Its whole body wiggled now, barely able to contain itself. She picked up the stick. The wood was smooth from being carried, warm from the dog's mouth. The dog's entire rear end wiggled so hard it lifted off the ground. She tossed the stick out the door. The dog bounded after it like she'd given it the greatest gift in creation. Came back 30 seconds later, dropped it at her feet again. She didn't pick it up this time. The dog waited, tail slowing, gradually, finally stopping. It looked at her, looked at the stick, looked back at her. Then it picked up the stick and trotted away, disappearing around the corner of the house. She finished eating, every bite a negotiation with her stomach, carried her plate to the wash basin. There was a bucket of water beside it, rag hanging over the edge, soap sitting in a chipped saucer. She washed the plate, set it on the sideboard to dry next to his. Through the window, she could see him working the fence. Sweat had soaked through the back of his shirt completely now. He moved slow but steady, the way a man does who knows the work will still be there tomorrow if he doesn't finish today. She walked back to the garden, knelt down in the dirt, started pulling weeds again. The afternoon burned on. The sun moved across the sky like it was nailed up there, barely creeping toward the horizon. By evening, half the garden was cleared. Her hands were blistered, the skin broken in places where she'd gripped too hard or pulled too fast. Blood mixed with dirt under her nails, dried there in dark crescents. She heard the pump squeal again. Looked up. He'd left something by it. A bar of lye soap, a clean rag folded neat. He was already walking back to the house, 20 yards away now. Didn't turn around, didn't check if she'd seen. She stood up, walked to the pump, worked the handle. Her shoulders screamed muscles she hadn't used in longer than she could remember. Waking up angry. Water gushed out, cold from deep in the earth. She held her hands under it. The water stung the blisters like liquid fire, turned pink as it washed away blood and dirt. She watched it run off her hands, disappear into the thirsty ground. She picked up the soap, scrubbed her hands until they were clean. The blisters had split open completely now, white skin peeled back, raw flesh showing underneath. They'd hurt worse tomorrow. She knew that, accepted it. She used the rag to dry her hands. Gentle, careful. The blisters had split open. They'd hurt worse tomorrow. But they were honest pain, earned pain, the kind that came from making something instead of having something done to you. She looked at her hands in the fading light, studied them like they belonged to someone else. Dirty, broken, calloused, useful. And for the first time since the wagon had dumped her in the dirt, something in her chest unclenched, just a fraction, just barely, just enough. She walked back to the bunkhouse, lay down on the bed without pulling off the boots. Too tired to care. Too tired to do anything but lie there and feel her body settling into the straw tick mattress. Feel the day's work in every muscle and bone. Outside. A coyote yipped. Another answered from somewhere far off. Then another. A whole conversation in a language she didn't understand but recognized anyway. She closed her good eye. The bad one was swollen shut anyway. And realized she'd just worked a full day without anyone telling her she had to. Without anyone watching to make sure she did. Without anyone punishing her if she didn't. She'd chosen it. The work. The garden. The blisters. All of it. Her own choice. The thought should have comforted her. Should have felt like something good. Instead, it terrified her worse than anything had in weeks, because if she could choose to work, she could choose to stay. And if she could choose to stay, she could choose to trust. And trust was the most dangerous thing she'd ever been offered. The kitchen fire had gone out during the night. She fed it mesquite 3 pieces, arranged just so. Watched the kindling catch. Flames licking up the sides. Smoke curled toward the flue, stinging her eyes until they watered. 6 weeks now. Maybe 7. She'd stopped counting after the first month when the days started blurring together like watercolors running in the rain. The coffee pot sat on the back of the stove where it always did. She filled it with water from the bucket, added grounds, set it to boil. The smell started filling the kitchen within minutes, bitter and strong. The way he liked it. Her hands didn't shake anymore when she worked. The blisters had hardened into calluses thick as boot leather. The swelling around her eye had gone down 3 weeks ago, leaving a faint scar cutting through her eyebrow where the skin had split deepest. She heard his door open across the hall, boots hitting the floor, the creak of floorboards under his weight. He came into the kitchen, hair flattened on one side from his pillow, gray stubble on his jaw catching the lamplight. Nodded at her just once, brief, and poured coffee into a tin cup, drank it standing by the window, looking out at nothing in particular or everything at once. They didn't talk, never did in the mornings. The silence wasn't empty, though. It was full of routine, of understanding, of something she didn't have a name for yet. He finished his coffee, set the cup in the wash basin without rinsing it, walked out, screen door slapping shut behind him. She watched through the window as he headed toward the stock pen. The limp was barely there now. Summer heat had loosened that old injury the way it always did, the way he'd told her it would back in week 2 when she'd finally asked about it. She poured her own coffee, drank it slow, letting the heat spread through her chest. The routine had settled in without them discussing it, without any conversation at all. Really. She handled the house and garden. He worked the stock and land. Morning and evening they ate together. Noon meal, too. When he came in from whatever work was occupying him that day, he'd stopped watching her like she might bolt in the night. She'd stopped flinching when he moved too fast or came too close. After breakfast, biscuits and gravy she'd made herself, learning by watching. By trial and error, she carried the laundry basket outside. His shirts, worn soft from years of washing. Her borrowed trousers, still too big, but familiar now. The clothesline sagged between 2 posts, rope worn thin in places where the fibers were starting to separate. She pinned up the first shirt, reached for the second. The rope snapped. Clean laundry hit the dirt in a heap, white shirts turning brown, her trousers collecting dust like they were magnetized. She stared at it, at an hour's work ruined, at clothes she'd just scrubbed raw on the washboard until her knuckles bled. That line needed replacing 2 months ago. She turned. Thomas stood 10 feet away, coil of new rope in his hand. Hemp, by the smell of it, strong. He walked to the post, started untying the old rope, fingers working the knot even though it was swollen tight from weather and use. She picked up the laundry, shook out the dirt, knowing it wouldn't be enough. It would all have to be washed again. "You got a name?" Her hands went still, clothespins between her teeth, pressing against her tongue. She took them out slow, looked at him. He was working the knot loose, not looking at her, focused on the rope like it was the most important thing in the world. "Been 6 weeks, maybe 7. Figure if you want me to know it, you'll tell me. If you don't, that's fine too." The old rope came free. He tossed it aside. It landed in a coil near the fence post. Started threading the new one through the hole drilled in the wood, pulling it through hand over hand. "Nalin." His hands stopped moving. Just for a second, then continued pulling rope. "Nalin." He said it careful, rolling it around in his mouth like he was tasting it, testing the weight of it. "That's a good name." He pulled the rope tight, tied it off with quick, practiced movements. Tested the line with his full weight, leaning back. It held. He walked back toward the barn without another word. She stood there in the yard, dirty laundry in her arms, the smell of hemp rope still hanging in the air. That was the first word she'd spoken to him. 6 weeks, maybe 7, of silence, broken by her own name. 3 syllables, 2 consonants, and 3 vowels arranged in a pattern her mother had given her. That her mother's mother had given her mother. The only thing she still owned that couldn't be taken. She carried the laundry back inside, heated water in the big pot on the stove, scrubbed the clothes again, working the soap in deep, rinsing until the water ran clear. By evening, everything was hanging on the new rope, the line held straight and tight, no sag at all. After supper, beans she'd cooked with salt pork, cornbread from the Dutch oven. She sat at the table. He'd left a sewing basket there that morning. Needle and thread, scissors with loose handles, 3 of his shirts that needed mending. She threaded the needle on the first try. Her hands knew this work even if everything else felt new. Apache women sewed, beadwork, mostly. Intricate patterns that told stories. Mending was easier, just putting things back together that had come apart. Thomas sat across from her. oiling tack. He worked methodically, rubbing neat's foot oil into every strap and buckle. The smell filled the kitchen animal fat and something chemical that made her nose itch. She'd gotten used to it, though. The way she'd gotten used to everything here. The silence, the routine, the not running. The dog lay between them on the floor, asleep, snoring just a little, twitching like it was chasing something in its dreams. The coal oil lamp flickered. She leaned closer to see the stitches, small and even, the way her mother had taught her before. She pushed that thought away, concentrated on the shirt in her hands. "Need to go to town soon," he said. She didn't look up, kept sewing, but her hands slowed just a fraction. Flour's almost gone. Need coffee. Few other things. He paused. The sound of his rag against leather stopped. "Thought you might want fabric. For sewing." She set down the shirt, looked at him. He was still working the oil into the tack, not meeting her eyes, focused on a bridle strap like it required all his attention. "For what? Dress? Maybe. If you want. Those trousers work fine for ranch work, but—" He shrugged, the gesture saying everything he couldn't find words for. She picked up the shirt again, finished the seam, cut the thread with her teeth. "When?" "Tomorrow, early, before the heat comes up." She threaded the needle again, started on the next shirt, a button that had come loose, hanging by a single thread. "I'll come." His hands stopped moving. He looked at her then, really looked. Not a glance, not checking on her, looking at her like she was a person making a decision that mattered. "You sure?" She nodded. Once. Firm. "All right, then." They went back to their work. The silence settled around them again, comfortable as an old coat. That night, lying in her bed, not the bunkhouse anymore. Hadn't been for 4 weeks now. Not since he'd moved her into the spare room in the house with its door that locked from the inside. She stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow she'd go back to that town, where they'd dumped her, where they'd watched her lie in the dirt and done nothing. Her stomach twisted. She pressed a hand against it, willing it to settle. But Thomas had asked if she wanted fabric. Not told her, not assumed. Asked, and she'd said yes. Her choice. Her voice. She rolled onto her side, pulled the blanket up even though the night was warm, through the wall. She could hear him moving around in his room, the creak of his bed as he lay down, the sigh of a man settling in after a long day, then quiet. She closed her eyes, tried to sleep. But all she could see was Main Street, the boardwalk, the faces staring, the silence louder than shouting. Tomorrow. She'd face it tomorrow. And maybe, just maybe, she wouldn't be facing it alone. The buckboard rattled over the same ruts it had rattled over 6 weeks ago, 7 weeks ago. However long it had been. Morning sun already hot on her shoulders, soaking through the cotton shirt, sweat starting in the small of her back. The town came into view, bigger than she remembered. New buildings going up on the east side, raw lumber bright as bone in the sunlight. Construction noise carrying across the flat land. Hammering, sawing, men shouting measurements. New families moving in every week since word came the railroad was pushing through. That this dried up nothing of a town might become something after all. Thomas pulled the wagon onto Main Street. Dust from other wagons, other horses, hung in the air like fog. People turned to look. One, then another, then more. She sat up straighter, kept her eyes forward, focused on the mercantile at the end of the street. He pulled up in front of it, set the brake with a squeal of wood on wood, climbed down, movements stiff from the ride. She climbed down on her side before he could come around, stood next to the wagon, hand resting on the sideboard. A woman walked past on the boardwalk, looked at Nalin, eyes widening just a fraction, looked away fast like she'd seen something she shouldn't, kept walking, skirts swishing. Two men stood outside the saloon across the street. One elbowed the other, jerked his chin toward the wagon, toward her. They both stared, not bothering to hide it. Thomas waited. Didn't say anything. Didn't rush her. She walked toward the mercantile steps, boots loud on the packed dirt. He fell into step beside her. Not ahead, not behind. Beside. An arm's length away, but present. The mercantile door had a bell attached to the top. It jangled when he opened it, loud and cheerful, completely at odds with the tightness in her chest. Inside smelled like it always did, like every mercantile she'd ever been in: coffee and leather and dust and pickle brine and fabric sizing and 100 other things mixing together into something that smelled like civilization, like commerce, like the white man's world. Barrels of flour lined one wall, 50-pound sacks stacked 3 high, fabric bolts on shelves behind the counter, organized by color, dark colors on the bottom, lighter ones on top. The storekeeper's wife, Judith Hendricks. She'd heard Thomas call her, stood behind the counter. Her mouth tightened when she saw Nalin. Not much. Just enough, like she'd bitten into something sour. Thomas walked to the counter. "Morning, Judith. Need 50 pounds of flour, 5 pounds of coffee beans, 2 pounds of sugar." Judith pulled out a piece of paper, started writing with a pencil stub she'd licked first. The scratch of graphite on paper was loud in the quiet store. "That'll be cash money. Thomas." She still hadn't looked at Nalin directly, kept her eyes on the paper, on her hands, on Thomas. Anywhere but at the Apache woman standing in her store. Not credit. Not with her here. Thomas pulled coins from his pocket, counted them out onto the counter. Slow. Deliberate. Each coin hitting wood with a distinct sound. Clink, clink, clink. Cash it is. Judith's jaw worked like she was chewing words she couldn't quite swallow. She swept the coins into her hand, deposited them in the till with more force than necessary. Thomas turned to the fabric bolts, gestured toward them without touching. "Pick what you want." Nalin walked to the shelves, ran her hand over the fabric: cotton, calico, muslin. One bolt was dark blue, almost navy, with tiny white flowers scattered across it like stars. She pulled it from the shelf with both hands, held it up to the light from the window. The fabric was stiff with sizing, would soften with washing, good weight, would wear well. 8 cents a yard, Judith said, her voice flat as hammered tin. "How much does she want?" "How much you need?" Thomas asked. Not Judith, her. Nalin thought about it, about how much fabric it would take for a dress. Simple, high-necked like the church women wore, long sleeves for the sun, nothing fancy. 10 yards. 10 yards of the blue calico, Thomas said to Judith. Judith measured it out on the counter, using the brass measuring strip nailed to the wood. Cut it with fabric shears that made a sound like scissors cutting paper, only louder. Folded it with sharp, angry movements, each fold precise and perfect and furious. Wrapped it in brown paper, tied it with string. Thomas paid, took the package, handed it to Nalin. She held it against her chest. The paper crinkled under her fingers, stiff and new. They loaded the supplies into the wagon. Thomas was tying down the flour sacks when footsteps approached on the boardwalk. Quick, purposeful. "Mr. Garrett." They both turned. A woman stood there. Early 30s, maybe. Brown hair pulled back in a simple bun, a few strands escaping around her face. Quick eyes that took in everything: the wagon, the supplies, Nalin, the package in her arms. She wore a good dress, not fancy, but quality fabric, neat stitching, the kind of dress a woman wore when she wanted to be taken seriously. "Ma'am." Thomas touched his hat brim. The woman looked at Nalin, direct, not away, not through her, not past her, at her, into her eyes, seeing her. "I'm Emma Crawford." A pause. "Reverend's wife." Another pause. This one waited different. "You're welcome at service. Sunday morning, 10 o'clock. She stopped. Let the words settle. "If you'd like to come." Nalin's throat closed up tight. She swallowed once, twice. It didn't help. "Thank you." The words came out rough, barely audible. But they came out. Emma smiled. Small, real. The kind of smile that reached her eyes and meant something. "I mean it. You're welcome." She walked away, back straight, steps purposeful, deliberate, not running, not hurrying. Walking like she had every right to be here, to say those words, to mean them. Thomas climbed onto the wagon. Nalin climbed up beside him. The package still clutched against her chest. They rode out of town, dust rising behind them. No one followed. No one threw anything. No one shouted, but she felt eyes tracking them, watching, judging, measuring. 2 miles out, when the town was nothing but a smudge behind them. Thomas spoke. "That took sand." She looked down at the brown paper package, smoothed her hand over it, feeling the fabric through the wrapping. "First time I choose to be seen," she said, working through the words in English, getting them right. "Not as captive, not as—" She searched for the word. "As Nalin." He nodded. Didn't say anything else. Just let her words hang there between them, real and solid and true. The wagon rolled on toward home, toward the ranch, toward the garden, and the chickens and the dog that would bark when it heard them coming, toward the place she'd stopped thinking of as temporary. That night, she spread the blue fabric on her bed, 10 yards of it, ran her hands over it, feeling the stiffness, imagining how it would look made up. A dress, her dress, something she'd chosen, something she'd make with her own hands. She'd start tomorrow, cut the pattern, begin the sewing. She picked up the fabric, held it to her face. It smelled like the mercantile sizing and dust and new cotton. It smelled like possibility. And for the first time in 6 weeks, 7 weeks, however long it had been, she let herself think about the future. Not tomorrow, not next week. Further than that. She folded the fabric, set it on the chair by the window, through the wall. She heard Thomas moving around, the scrape of his chair on the floor, the clink of his cup being set down, the creak of his bed. Normal sounds, evening sounds, home sounds. She sat on the edge of her bed, looked at the blue fabric in the lamplight, and realized something that made her breath catch in her chest. She'd stopped sleeping with her back to the wall weeks ago, had stopped sleeping curled up tight, hands tucked against her chest, ready to defend or run. Now she slept on her side, sometimes her back, arms loose, face soft, like someone who wasn't expecting to be hurt in the night, like someone who felt safe. The realization should have comforted her. Instead, it terrified her more than the town had. More than the stairs. More than going back to that place where they'd left her in the dirt. Because if she felt safe, she was vulnerable. And vulnerability was more dangerous than any broken bone or split lip or swollen eye. Vulnerability meant she had something to lose. The garden tomatoes were finally ripening, red splitting through green like wounds opening. Nalin knelt between the rows, picking the ones that had turned completely, dropping them in the wicker basket beside her knee. Hoofbeats. She went still, hands frozen on a tomato still half green. Listened. One horse, coming fast, too fast for a casual ride. She stood up slow, shaded her eyes against the afternoon sun. A rider appeared on the track from town, dust trailing behind him in a brown plume. White man, 30, maybe 35. Trail dust covering him head to boot. His horse was lathered, foam white as soap suds at the bit, flanks dark with sweat. He pulled up 20 feet from the garden, horse dancing sideways, fighting the bit, looked at her, studied her, up and down, slow and deliberate. "You, the Apache woman." She said nothing, tomato still in her hand, warm from the sun. "I'm looking for Thomas Garrett's place." He gestured at the house, the barn, the corral. "This it." She stayed quiet. Heart starting to hammer against her ribs, not fast, but hard. Each beat like a fist. The man swung down from his horse, tied it to the corral rail with quick, practiced movements, started walking toward her. The dog appeared from under the porch, hackles up, a low growl building in its chest, continuous and warning. "Easy now." The man held up his hands, showing them empty, but he kept coming. Boots crunching in the dirt, getting closer. Nalin back toward the house. 1 step, 2. Her hip hit the porch rail hard enough to bruise. "Don't run off now. Got business with you." The barn door scraped open. Wood on dirt. Thomas stepped out, rifle in his hands, not aimed at anything, not pointed. Just there, present, a fact that couldn't be ignored. "State your business." The man turned, sized Thomas up. The rifle. The way Thomas stood balanced, weight-centered, comfortable with the weapon in his hands. "Name's Dockery. Come from Fort Stockton way." He pulled a folded paper from his vest, movement slow and obvious. "Looking for an Apache woman. Heard Garrett's got one out here." Thomas walked closer. 10 feet away. Stopped. And Dockery unfolded the paper, held it up so Thomas could see. "Got papers. Bill of sale. She was promised to me. Payment for supplies delivered." Thomas set the rifle against the porch rail, held out his hand. "Let me see." Dockery handed it over. Paper crackling in the dry air. Thomas unfolded it careful. Read slowly. His lips moved just a little, the way they did when he was working through something written, the way they did during her reading lessons in the evening. Nalin watched his face. Couldn't read it. Stone and weathered leather giving nothing away. "This ain't legal," Thomas said finally. "Not in Texas. Can't sell a person. Hasn't been legal since the war ended." Dockery's jaw tightened, muscle jumping under the stubble. "That paper's signed. Witnessed by 2 men. By who?" Thomas refolded the paper, creased it sharp, held it out. "2 men I never heard of in a town that doesn't exist anymore." He waited. "You want to press it? Go see the sheriff in town, but I'm telling you now, it won't hold. Not for 1 second." Dockery didn't take the paper back. His eyes slid to Nalin. Lingered. traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl, that made her want to scrub herself raw. She knows what she is. Property. Traded fair and legal. She's hired help, Thomas said, each word separate and clear. Works for wages, room and board. That's the arrangement. Dockery spat. Tobacco juice hitting the dirt close to Thomas's boot. Dark brown and wet. Deliberate. We'll see about that. He walked back to his horse, untied it with a jerk that made the animal toss its head. Mounted up hard, using the stirrup to vault into the saddle. "I'll be back," he said, looking at Nalin, not Thomas. "You remember what you are, girl, what you'll always be." He turned the horse, kicked it hard, spurs digging in. The horse bolted forward, eager to be gone. Thomas stood there, watched until Dockery was out of sight, until even the dust had settled, until there was nothing but empty track and the sound of cicadas starting up their afternoon song. Then he turned to Nalin. "You all right?" She nodded. Her hands were shaking, though. Had been shaking since Dockery dismounted. She pressed them flat against her thighs, tried to make them stop. "He comes back. He answers to the law," Thomas said. "And to me." He paused. "Both, if it comes to that." He picked up the rifle, walked to the porch steps, sat down heavy, like his legs had suddenly remembered they were tired. She stayed where she was, rooted, couldn't make herself move. "You afraid?" he asked, not looking at her, looking at his hands on the rifle stock. She nodded. Of him. A pause, longer this time. Or me. She looked at him, really looked, at his weathered face, at the gray in his hair catching the sunlight, at his hands resting loose on his knees now, the rifle propped against the porch rail behind him, at the way he sat tired but alert, ready, but not aggressive. "Not you," she said, working the words out careful in English. "Not anymore." Something shifted in his face. Not a smile. Just a softening. A relaxing of muscles that had been held tight. "Good." He stood up, brushed dust off his trousers. "Come on, let's get you moved. I'm already... The spare room's got a lock, but it ain't enough." He walked toward the house. "You take my room. Better lock on that door. Window faces the front yard so you can see anyone coming up the track. Where will you... I'll take the spare room. Be fine." He went inside. She followed, legs working automatic even though her mind was still back in the garden, still watching Dockery ride away. His room was bigger than hers. Bed against the far wall. Quilt faded but clean. Trunk at the foot. Lid closed. Washstand with a basin. Pitcher half full of water. Window overlooking the front yard just like he'd said. And the door had a heavy bolt, metal. New. The brass still bright, not tarnished like the rest of the hardware in the house. "Put that in last month," he said, following her gaze. "Figured you might need it someday." He'd known. Even before today. Even before Dockery. He'd known someone might come, and he'd prepared anyway. Had gone to town, bought a new bolt, installed it while she was working the garden or doing laundry or cooking supper. Had never mentioned it. Had just done it. He gathered his things from the room. Didn't take long, he didn't own much. Extra shirt, spare trousers, razor and strop, a book with a cracked spine. Carried them all in one armload to the spare room. "Lock it tonight," he said from the doorway. "Every night until this settles, however long that takes." That evening they ate in silence. Beans she'd cooked with a ham hock, cornbread from the Dutch oven, still warm, butter melting into the crumb. She couldn't taste any of it. Might as well have been eating sawdust for all the flavor registered. After. He cleaned his rifle, stripped it down on the kitchen table, pulled the bolt, checked the chamber, ran an oiled rag down the barrel, put it back together piece by piece. Movements practiced and sure. She sewed, finishing the blue dress nearly done now. Just the last seam down the side. The needle slipped, pricked her finger deep. Blood welled up, bright and red. She stuck her finger in her mouth, tasted copper and salt. "You all right?" Thomas asked, not looking up from the rifle. Yes, but she wasn't. Her hands were shaking again, worse now than in the garden. She couldn't make them stop no matter how hard she pressed them together. The dog got up from its place by the stove, walked to the door, whined low in its throat. Thomas stood, opened the door. The dog trotted out, disappeared into the dusk. Thomas stood in the doorway, looking out at nothing, at everything, at the empty yard turning purple in the fading light. "What if he comes back tonight?" Nalin asked. Her voice sounded strange, small, like it belonged to someone else. "He won't." "How do you know?" "Because he's not stupid." Thomas turned to look at her. "He'll go to the sheriff first. Try to make it legal. Get the law on his side." He paused. "When that doesn't work, and it won't, he'll come back. But not alone. He'll bring men. 2. Maybe 3. Try to force it." Her stomach dropped, fell through the floor. "How many can you pull?" "Stop." He picked up the rifle, checked the load again even though he'd just checked it. Set it down within arm's reach. "If I have to. As many as come. But I'm hoping it won't come to that. What if it does?" He looked at her. Really looked. The way he had that first day when she was lying in the dirt, seeing her, measuring something. "Then it does." She finished the dress with trembling hands, folded it, set it on the chair by the window. "I should leave," she said, not looking at him, looking at the blue fabric. "If I'm gone, he won't come back. You won't have to—" "No." The word was flat. Final. No room for argument. "But if I— No." He stood up, walked to the stove, poured the last of the coffee even though it had gone bitter from sitting. "You're hired help. That's the arrangement. You stay as long as you want. That's what I told you first day. Nothing's changed." Everything had changed. "Why?" The word came out harsh, angry. "Why do this?" He was quiet for a long time, drank his bitter coffee, stared out the window at the dark. Finally, "Because it's right." That was all. No speech, no explanation, no philosophy or religion or grand ideals, just because it's right. She stood up. "I'm going to bed." "Lock the door." "I will." She walked to his room, her room now, closed the door, slid the bolt, heavy, solid, new brass gleaming in the lamplight. She sat on the bed, the blue dress in her lap, fabric soft under her fingers from all the handling. Outside, the dog barked, once, twice, sharp and warning. Then quiet. She got up, looked out the window, couldn't see anything. Just darkness and stars and the shapes of things she knew were there but couldn't make out. She lay down, didn't undress. Boots still on. Pulled the blanket over herself even though the night was warm. Through the wall. She heard Thomas moving around, his boots hitting the floor. One and then the other. the creak of the bed in the spare room, then silence. She stared at the ceiling, at the shadows the lamplight made on the rafters. Dockery would come back. She knew it. Felt it in her bones the way she felt weather changing, the way she felt danger before it arrived. And when he did, she touched the bolt on the door. Cold metal under her fingers. New and strong and solid. Thomas had put this in a month ago. Before Dockery. Before any threat appeared that she could see. He'd known someone would come for her eventually. And he'd prepared anyway. Had bought the bolt. Had installed it. Had moved her into this room with its window facing front, and its heavy lock and its view of anyone approaching. Had made it so she could lock herself in. Or lock him out. Whichever she needed. She closed her eyes. Tried to sleep. But all she could see was Dockery's face. The way he'd looked at her. The way he'd said, "You know what you are. Property." Her hands curled into fists under the blanket. Fingernails digging into her palms. She knew what she'd been. What they'd tried to make her. But for 7 weeks, maybe 8 now, she'd been something else. She'd been Nalin, who worked the garden, who mended shirts by lamplight, who drank coffee in the morning and washed dishes after supper, who had calluses instead of just scars, who had a name instead of nothing, who had a door she could lock and a room she could call hers. And lying there in the dark, in a room with a new bolt she'd chosen to use, she realized something that made her chest go tight and her breath come short. She wasn't going to let Dockery take that away. Not without a fight. The question was, what kind of fight could a woman like her possibly win against men with guns and papers, and the law, such as it was, maybe on their side, against a whole system that said she was property, that she could be traded and sold and claimed? What weapon did she have against that? And then lying there in the dark, listening to Thomas breathing in the next room, feeling the weight of the bolt on the door she knew. The only weapon she'd ever really had. The one they couldn't take away no matter how hard they tried. The same one that had made her get up out of that dirt 7 weeks ago when it would have been easier to stay down. Choice. She'd choose to stay. She'd choose to fight. Not with guns or papers or laws, but with simple, stubborn refusal to be moved again. They'd have to kill her to take her. And if Thomas Garrett, a man she'd known for 7 weeks, a man who'd asked nothing from her, a man who'd given her a locked door and called her by her name if he was willing to stand between her and them, then she'd be damned if she'd run and leave him to face it alone. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, it settled into her bones like truth. Cold and hard and immovable. She opened her eyes in the dark and waited for morning. Because morning would come, and maybe Dockery with it. And when he did, he'd find out exactly what kind of woman she'd become in 7 weeks of pulling weeds and mending shirts and learning that her name mattered. He'd find out the hard way. The blue dress lay on the bed. Nalin stood in her borrowed trousers and work shirt, staring at it like it might bite. Sunday morning. 3 days since Dockery rode off making promises that felt more like threats. 3 days of watching the horizon, listening for hoofbeats that didn't come, jumping at shadows that turned out to be chickens, or the dog, or nothing at all. She picked up the dress, held it against herself. The fabric was stiff. She'd washed it yesterday in the big wash tub, hung it to dry. Pressed it with the flat iron heated on the stove until her arm ached. High neck, long sleeves, plain as dirt but clean. Hers. She'd never worn anything like it. Not that she could remember anyway. Not in the life she had before the one that started 7 weeks ago in the dust of Main Street. She pulled off the work shirt, The trousers stood there in her worn cotton shift, thin enough to see through in places. The dress slipped over her head, heavy. The fabric settled around her legs, unfamiliar weight pulling at her shoulders. She fastened the buttons down the front. 14 of them, small and white and harder to manage than she'd expected. Her fingers fumbled with the last few, clumsy and thick. She looked down at herself. Blue calico with tiny white flowers scattered across it like someone had spilled stars. A knock on the door. "You decent, yes." Thomas opened the door, stopped in the doorway, looked at her, stared. Really? For 3 full seconds that felt like hours. "You look proper," he said finally. "Not pretty, not beautiful, not fine. Proper." The word settled over her like the dress. Respectable, acceptable. The thing that mattered out here where everything was measured and weighed and judged. She smoothed the fabric over her hips. The gesture felt foreign, like something someone else would do. Someone who wore dresses and went to church and belonged. "I go to church today." He nodded. "I'll drive you." "You don't have to." "I'm going anyway." He wasn't. She knew he wasn't. He never went to church. 7 weeks she'd been here, and he hadn't gone once, hadn't mentioned it, hadn't seemed to think about it at all. But he was going today. For her. Because of her. To stand beside her when she walked back into that town. The buckboard rolled into town at 9:45. Church bells started ringing as they passed the mercantile, deep and sonorous. Cast iron tongues swinging in the belfry, calling the faithful and the fearful alike. People were walking toward the white building at the end of Main Street. Sunday clothes pressed and brushed. Families moving in clusters. Children running ahead until mothers called them back with sharp voices that carried in the still morning air. Thomas pulled the wagon up to the hitching rail outside the church. Set the brake. Nolin's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the blue fabric, felt her pulse beating against her palms. "You don't have to do this," Thomas said, looking straight ahead, not at her, giving her space to decide. "Yes," she said. "I do." She climbed down before he could help her, stood there in the street. The dress felt wrong, too clean, too new. Too much like pretending to be something she wasn't. Like putting on a costume for a play she didn't know the lines to. Emma Crawford appeared on the church steps. Saw them. Her face opened not quite a smile, but something close. She walked over, skirts swishing against her ankles. "I'm glad you came." She looked at Nolin's dress. "That's lovely work. Did you make it yourself?" "Yes. The stitching is beautiful. You have a real talent." Nolin didn't know what to say to that. Nodded instead. Emma turned to Thomas. Nodded once. "Mr. Garrett?" "Ma'am." Emma touched Nolin's elbow. Light, gentle. The kind of touch that was asking, not taking. "Come. I'll show you where we sit." Nolin followed her up the wooden steps, each one creaking under her weight. Through the door. The church was packed, every pew full or nearly so. The sound hit her first murmured conversations like water flowing, rustling fabric, children whispering to each other, someone coughing in the back, then the smell. Perfume mixing with pomade, mixing with sweat under Sunday clothes, beeswax candles burning in sconces on the walls. Old hymnals and wood polish and something else underneath it all, dust and age and the accumulated prayers of decades. Heads turned as they walked down the center aisle. Eyes tracked them, one, then another, then more. Conversations stopped mid-word, cut off clean as knife strokes. Emma kept walking. Steady, unhurried, like she had every right to be here, to bring Nolin here, to claim this space. Nalin forced herself to keep pace, to not look down, to not curl inward, to keep her spine straight and her chin up, even though everything in her body wanted to make itself small and invisible. They stopped at a pew halfway down. Emma stepped in, gestured for Nalin to follow. Nalin sat. The wood was hard under her, unforgiving. She folded her hands in her lap, squeezed them together to make them stop shaking. Thomas slid into the pew beside her, not touching, not crowding, just there, present, a wall between her and whatever was coming. The woman in the pew in front turned around, old. White hair pulled into a bun so tight it made her eyes pull at the corners. She looked at Nalin. Her mouth pinched shut like she was holding back words with physical force. She turned back around, spine rigid, shoulders set. The organ started. Everyone stood. Nalin stood with them. Thomas handed her a hymnal thick book with a cracked leather cover, pages thin as onion skin. She looked at the words. They meant nothing. She couldn't read well enough yet. The letters were still just shapes, still puzzles she had to work through one at a time. She held the book anyway, moved her lips while everyone else sang. No sound coming out, just the pretense of participation. The hymn went on forever. 4 verses, 5, finally ended. Everyone sat. The Reverend stepped up to the pulpit. Older man, probably 60, gray beard trimmed neat, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He wore a black suit that had seen better days, shiny at the elbows from years of leaning on podiums. He opened his Bible. The leather cracked, loud in the settling quiet. Today's scripture comes from the Gospel of Luke, he said. His voice was deep, resonant, the kind of voice that carried authority without demanding it. The parable of the Good Samaritan, he read. Nalin listened, trying to follow, trying to understand. A man beaten, left for dead on the road. A priest passed by, saw him, crossed to the other side, kept walking. A Levite came, saw him, crossed to the other side, kept walking. But a Samaritan, an outsider, a foreigner, the kind of person good people weren't supposed to associate with. He stopped. He helped. He bound the man's wounds. He paid for his care. The Reverend closed the Bible. We live in a hard land, he said. Easy to pass by when we see someone suffering. Easy to say it's not our concern. Easy to find reasons why we can't help, why we shouldn't help. He paused. Let the words settle. But Scripture calls us to see the stranger, the wounded, the one cast out. Another pause. To see them as our neighbor. His eyes swept the congregation, landed on Nalin, stayed there for 1 heartbeat, 2, moved on. Jesus asks who was the true neighbor to the man who fell among thieves, and the answer is clear. The one who showed mercy. The sermon continued. 10 more minutes, maybe 15. Nalin stopped listening. She could feel the stares, feel the weight of eyes on the back of her neck, feel judgment being passed and recorded and stored away. The woman in front turned again, whispered something to the man beside her husband, probably by the way they leaned together. He glanced back. His face was stone, no expression at all, which was somehow worse than anger. The sermon ended. Everyone stood. Another hymn. This one she knew the tune to, at least. Had heard Thomas humming it while he worked. She moved her mouth along with the words she couldn't read. Then it was over. People filed out, slow, taking their time, stopping in the aisle to talk. to make plans for Sunday dinner, to discuss the sermon and the weather and everything except the Apache woman sitting in their church. Nalin stayed in the pew, waited for the crowd to thin. Emma touched her arm. Ladies' Aid meets Thursday afternoons, 2 o'clock. We're quilting for winter charity. She smiled. Extra hands are always welcome. The older woman with the tight bun stepped closer. Judith Hendricks from the Mercantile. Reverend's wife, I'm not sure that's appropriate. Why not? Emma's voice stayed pleasant. Sweet, even. But there was something underneath it. Steel wrapped in silk. You know why. Judith's voice was low. Meant for Emma's ears only, but carrying anyway in the church acoustics. I know Scripture says to welcome the stranger, to show hospitality. Emma waited. Or did I mishear today's sermon? Judith's face went red, mottled with it, spreading up from her neck to her hairline. She's not a stranger. She's... The word hung there, unspoken but loud anyway. She's what Emma asked. Still pleasant, still smiling. A woman, a neighbor, someone in need of community. Judith's mouth opened, closed, opened again. No words came out. Finally she turned and walked away, spine rigid, steps sharp and angry. Emma looked at Nalin. Thursday, 2 o'clock. We meet in the church basement. If you'd like to come. Nalin's throat was tight, words stuck there like stones. She swallowed them down, tried again. Thank you. They walked out together. The sun was blinding after the dim church interior. Nalin blinked against it, eyes watering. Thomas stood by the wagon, waiting. Patient as stone. They climbed in. He released the brake. The wagon rolled forward, wheels creaking. No one spoke until they were out of town, until the buildings were behind them, and there was nothing but open land and the sound of the wagon and the jingle of harness. That took sand, Thomas said. Nalin looked down at her dress. Blue calico already dusty from the church floor, from the street, from the world that wanted to mark her, to claim her, to put her back in the dirt where she belonged. First time I choose to be seen, she said, working the words out in English, getting them right. Not as captive, not as... She searched for the word. As Nalin. The words came easier now. 7 weeks of listening, of learning, of piecing together this language that wasn't hers but was becoming something she could use. Thomas nodded. You earned it. Not through beauty, not through being saved, not through being chosen, through choosing, through standing up, through walking into that church with her head up and her spine straight. They rode in silence. Back at the ranch, Nalin went to her room, changed out of the blue dress, hung it on a nail carefully, smoothing out the wrinkles. She put the work clothes back on. They felt right, familiar. The trousers and shirt that smelled like lye soap and sweat and garden dirt. She walked out to the garden, knelt between the rows. The tomatoes needed picking again. They always needed picking this time of year. The dog appeared, dropped a stick at her feet, sat down, tail sweeping the dirt in wide arcs. She looked at it, at the dog, at those brown eyes watching her with complete and uncomplicated hope. The dog's tail swept faster. She picked up the stick, threw it. The dog bounded after it like she'd given it the world, came back 30 seconds later, dropped it at her feet again. This time she threw it further. She was picking tomatoes, hands stained red from the juice. when she heard hoofbeats. 3 riders this time. She stood up, shaded her eyes against the afternoon sun. Dockery. And 2 others she didn't recognize. Thomas stepped out of the barn. No rifle visible, but she knew it was close. Within reach, loaded. The riders pulled up at the fence line. Didn't dismount. Didn't come closer. "Garrett," Dockery said. "Sheriff says the papers ain't legal, but he also says she's free to leave if she wants." He looked at Nalin. Direct. Challenging. "That right, you want to leave with us?" Nalin walked forward, stopped beside Thomas, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "No," she said. Clear. Loud. No tremor in her voice. "See there," one of the other men said. "Younger. Nervous. She's being kept against her will." "I am hired by Thomas Garrett," Nalin said, each word separate and deliberate. "I work. I stay. My choice." Dockery's jaw worked, muscle jumping under the stubble. "You're making a mistake, girl." "It's her mistake to make," Thomas said. "Now get off my land." The 3 men sat there, horses shifting under them, sensing the tension, wanting to be gone. Finally, Dockery spat, brown juice hitting the dirt between them. "This ain't over." "Yeah," Thomas said. "It is." They turned their horses, rode off, not fast, not running, just leaving, making a point of how unhurried they were, how unworried, how certain this would go their way eventually. Nalin stood there, watching until they disappeared, until even the dust had settled. "You think they'll come back?" she asked. "No." "You sure?" "Sure enough." But his hand rested on his gun belt, just in case. That night, after supper, beans and cornbread and coffee so strong it could strip paint, she sat at the table with her sewing. Thomas was in his chair with an old newspaper, reading by lamplight. "Thursday," she said, not looking up from the mending. "Emma invited me to Ladies' Aid." He looked up. "You going?" "I think so." "Want me to drive you?" "I can walk." "It's 3 miles." "I can walk 3 miles." He went back to his newspaper, turned a page. "All right then." As she finished the mending, set it aside in the basket. "Thomas." "Yeah. Thank you for today." He folded the newspaper, set it on the table, looked at her across the lamp's circle of light. "You don't need to thank me for doing what's right." But she did. Because most people didn't do what was right. Most people crossed to the other side of the road. Most people found reasons not to help, not to see, not to care. Most people weren't Thomas Garrett. She went to her room, locked the door, not out of fear anymore, just habit, routine. Lay down in the bed that used to be his, in the room that was hers now. She'd claimed space in a church today, claimed her name in front of witnesses, claimed her right to stay or go as she chose. And something had shifted, something fundamental and irreversible. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was building something, piece by piece, day by day. Through the wall she heard Thomas settling in for the night, the familiar sounds, the comfort of another person nearby who meant her no harm. She closed her eyes. And for the first time since the wagon had dumped her in the dirt 8 weeks ago, she let herself imagine next spring. The garden expanded. Maybe fruit trees like Thomas had mentioned. Apple trees. Planted the Apache way she could teach him that. Her reading the words in the hymnal instead of just pretending. Her name known in town. Not as the Apache woman. Just as Nalin. A life that was hers. By choice. Not given. Not taken. Chosen. She was almost asleep when she heard it. Hoofbeats. Distant but getting closer. Fast. Too fast. Her eyes opened. The dog started barking. Sharp. Frantic. Warning. She heard Thomas's door open, his boots hitting the floor, and she realized with cold certainty settling in her stomach like a stone Dockery had lied about it being over. Nalin sat up. Her heart kicked against her ribs, not fast but hard, each beat like something trying to break out. The hoofbeats were closer now. Multiple horses, moving fast, urgent. Thomas's door opened. His boots hit the floor in quick succession. Thud. Thud. Heavy footsteps crossing to the front room. She got out of bed. Still in her work clothes, she hadn't changed, hadn't even considered it. Opened her door. Thomas stood at the window, rifle in his hands now. Not on the porch rail anymore. Here. Ready. How many? She asked. Can't tell yet. He glanced at her. Stay inside. The hoofbeats stopped. Right outside, close enough to hear the horses blowing. Tack jingling as they shifted weight. Thomas moved to the door. Didn't open it. Rifle held across his chest. Waiting. Garrett. Dockery's voice. Loud. Slurred at the edges. Send her out. Thomas said nothing. Just stood there, breathing steady, rifle ready. We ain't leaving without her. Then you ain't leaving, Thomas said through the closed door. Silence. Then the sound of men dismounting. Boots hitting dirt. 1, 2, 3 sets. Nalin's breath came faster, shorter. She looked around the room. No back door. Windows too small to climb through even if she broke the glass. She was trapped, boxed in. Exactly where she'd sworn she'd never be again. The dog was barking. Frantic now, high-pitched and continuous. Last chance, Garrett. We're taking her one way or another. Thomas pulled back the hammer on the rifle. The click was loud in the quiet room. Loud as a gunshot. Loud as the end of everything. Nalin moved to the window, looked out through the wavy glass. 3 men, Dockery and the 2 from earlier. They stood spread out across the yard, hands near their guns. Ready, waiting for an excuse. Her stomach dropped, fell straight through her body and kept falling. This was it. They'd come to take her. Or killed Thomas trying. Or both. She turned from the window, walked to the door. What are you doing? Thomas didn't take his eyes off the window, didn't look at her. I can't let you get back. They'll kill you. Maybe. For me. He finally looked at her then. Not for you. Because it's right. She stood there, hands shaking, her whole body shaking now, tremors running through her like fever. Outside, one of the men laughed, high and nervous. You gonna hide behind a door all night, Garrett? Come out and talk like men. Thomas's jaw tightened, muscle jumping. Nalin moved before she could think, before she could stop herself. Pulled the bolt on the door, her fingers clumsy with it. Slipping, finally catching, sliding it back. No? Thomas grabbed for her arm. Too late. She opened the door, stepped out onto the porch. The 3 men turned, looked at her. Dockery's face split into a grin, teeth showing in the moonlight. Well now, he said. There she is. Saved us the trouble of dragging you out. Nalin's legs wanted to give out, wanted to fold under her like wet paper. She locked her knees, stood straight, the porch boards rough under her bare feet. "I am hired by Thomas Garrett," she said. Her voice shook. She pushed through it, made the words come anyway. "I work here. I stay here. That ain't your choice to make." "Yes, it is." She took a step forward. Down one porch step. Cold wood under her feet. "You touch me. Law comes. Town knows me now. I have—" She searched for the word. "Witnesses." Dockery laughed. "Town don't care about some squaw. I care." They all turned. A horse and rider appeared from the darkness, coming from the direction of town, fast. The rider pulled up hard, horse sliding to a stop, throwing its head, Emma Crawford, hair falling out of its pins, breathing hard. She slid off the horse, stumbled when she hit the ground, caught herself against the horse's shoulder. "I'm Emma Crawford," she said, walking forward on unsteady legs. "Reverend's wife." She positioned herself between Nayland and the three men, arms loose at her sides but chin up. "Ride off. Now. Or I fetch the sheriff myself." Dockery's eyes narrowed. "This ain't your concern, Mrs. Crawford." "It is now. We got rights." "No, you don't." Emma's voice steadied, got stronger. "That paper you showed the sheriff, he told my husband about it this afternoon. Said it was worth less than the ink it was written with. Said it wouldn't hold up in any court in Texas." She took another step forward. "You're trespassing, threatening violence, making threats against a woman under Mr. Garrett's employ. That's what you got." One of the other men shifted his weight, looked at Dockery, young, nervous. His hand moved away from his gun. "I didn't sign on for this. You said we were just collecting what was owed." "Shut up." "No." The young man took a step back. "You said it was legal, said we had papers. But now there's witnesses. The Reverend's wife." He looked at Nalin, at Emma. "This ain't right. You're both cowards." "Maybe so." The young man walked to his horse, mounted up. "But I ain't stupid. I ain't getting hanged over your grudge." He turned his horse, rode off. Not fast, not running, just leaving. The third man watched him go, looked at Dockery. "He's got a point. You too. Me too." The third man mounted his horse. "Good luck with your collecting." He rode off too, same direction. Same deliberate pace that said this wasn't worth dying over. Dockery stood there, alone now. His hand hovered near his gun, fingers twitching. "You really want to try it?" Thomas asked from the doorway. Rifle aimed now, not pointed at the ground anymore, pointed at Dockery's chest. One-on-one, with two witnesses, maybe three if the dog counts. Dockery's hand moved away from his gun, slow, reluctant, like it hurt him to do it. "This ain't over," he said. "Yeah," Thomas said. "It is." Dockery spat into the dirt, near Nalin's feet. Tobacco juice dark as blood in the moonlight. She didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood there and met his eyes. "You remember what you are," he said. Nalin met his stare, held it, didn't look away. "I know what I am," she said. Clear, steady. No shake in her voice anymore. "Hired help. For Thomas Garrett. That is arrangement." She paused. Let the words settle. Let them take root. "I am not nothing." Dockery's face twisted. Something ugly moving under the skin. He mounted his horse, jerked the reins hard. The horse tossed its head. Fighting the bit, he kicked it, hard. spurs digging in. The horse bolted forward, disappearing into the darkness. The sound of hoofbeats fading, then gone. The silence that followed was absolute. Nolin's legs gave out. She hit the porch, hard, knees first, then hands, splinters driving into her palms. She couldn't stop shaking, couldn't make her body work right. Everything was trembling hands, arms, shoulders, jaw chattering even though the night was warm. Emma knelt beside her, put a hand on her shoulder. Easy now, easy. He's gone. They're all gone. Thomas set the rifle against the doorframe, came down the steps. Nalin looked up at him. I couldn't let you. The words broke, came out wrong. I couldn't. I know. Emma helped her stand, supported her weight when her legs wobbled. Lord have mercy. I was terrified. My hands are still shaking. Nalin almost laughed. It came out as a sob, choked and wet. Me also. But we didn't run, Emma said, looking at her direct. We stood, both of us. Yes. Nalin's throat was tight, words hard to push out. We stood. Thomas picked up the rifle. Let's get inside. I'll make coffee. They went into the house. Thomas lit the lamp, started the stove. Fed it kindling until flames caught. Set the coffee pot on. Emma sank into a chair. Her hands were shaking now, too. Visible tremors. She clasped them together in her lap, squeezed tight. How did you know? Nalin asked, standing because sitting felt impossible. Too still. Her body needed to move, to do something, to burn off the fear that was still coursing through her. I didn't, not for certain. Emma pushed hair out of her face with shaking hands. But after church today, Judith Hendricks was talking, loud enough for half the congregation to hear. Said Dockery wasn't done. Said he'd been drinking at the saloon. Said he'd be back tonight. She looked at Thomas. I saddled my horse. Told my husband I was going for a ride to clear my head. Came here as fast as I could. Thomas poured coffee. 3 cups. Handed them around. The tin was hot enough to burn, but Nalin held it anyway. Needed something real to hold on to. You could have been hurt, Thomas said. So could you. Emma drank. Her cup rattled against her teeth. Sorry, I can't seem to stop shaking. It's fine, Nalin said. I can't either. They sat there, 3 of them, drinking coffee in the lamplight. The silence broken only by the fire crackling in the stove and the dog whining at the door. Thomas let it in. The dog went straight to Nalin, pressed against her legs. She reached down, buried her fingers in its fur. Finally, Emma stood. I should get back. Jacob will worry. I'll ride with you part way, Thomas said. Make sure you get home safe. You don't have to. Yeah, I do. Emma smiled. Tired. All right then. She looked at Nalin. Thursday, 2 o'clock. I meant what I said about Ladies' Aid. I'll be there. Emma squeezed her hand, then walked out. Thomas followed. Nalin heard their horses moving away, the sound fading into the night. She went to the door, slid the bolt, stood there with her hand on it. Then her legs gave out again. She slid down the door, sat on the floor, knees pulled up to her chest. The dog pressed against her side. The shaking wouldn't stop. Her whole body was shaking now, teeth chattering, hands trembling so hard she couldn't make a fist. She'd stood up to Dockery, stood beside Emma, said the words out loud, "I am not nothing," and meant them, every syllable. But now, alone in the quiet, the fear came flooding back, cold and sharp and choking. What if Dockery did come back? What if next time there were more men? What if they came in daylight when Thomas was away? What if the dog licked her face, warm tongue on cold skin? She wrapped her arms around it, held on. The dog smelled like dust and sunshine and itself. Normal smells, safe smells. She sat there for a long time. The dog didn't move, just let her hold on. Finally, she heard hoofbeats. One horse, 3 knocks on the door. She opened it. Thomas stood there. She got home safe. Husband was waiting on the porch, worried but not angry. Nalin nodded. He came inside, looked at her, really looked, at her bare feet, at her hands still trembling, at the way she was holding herself together through sheer will. "You stood," he said. "I had to." "No, you didn't." He set the rifle by the door, removed his hat, ran a hand through his hair. "You could have stayed inside, could have let me handle it, could have run out the back when they were focused on the front. There is no back door. There's windows. Too small. You could have made yourself small." He looked at her. "But you didn't. You walked out there. You stood beside Emma. You told them no. I couldn't let you die for me. Not for you, because it's right. I know." She wrapped her arms around herself. "But I couldn't. I couldn't hide anymore. Couldn't let someone else fight for me while I stayed safe." He nodded, walked to the stove, poured more coffee, even though hers was still half full and cold. Brought it to her anyway. She took it, held it, felt the warmth seep into her hands. "When Emma came," Nalin said slowly, "I realized something." "What?" "I'm not alone anymore." The words hung in the air between them. Real, solid, true. Thomas sat down across from her. "No, you're not." They drank their coffee. The lamp flickered. Outside, a coyote called. Another answered. The conversation of the wild going on regardless of human drama. Normal sounds. Evening sounds. Sounds that said the world kept turning even when your world threatened to stop. She finished her coffee, set the cup down. "I'm going to bed," she said. "Lock the door." "I will." She walked to her room, closed the door, slid the bolt, sat on the bed. The blue dress hung on the nail, clean, pressed, ready for Thursday, ladies' aid, quilting, community. She lay down, pulled the blanket up even though she wasn't cold, just needed the weight of it, the comfort. Through the wall she heard Thomas settling in, the familiar sounds of evening routine, boots hitting the floor, bed springs creaking. She closed her eyes and realized she'd said, "I am not nothing." But she still hadn't defined what she was. Hired help. Yes, worker. Yes, woman who could read 5 words and was learning more every night. But what else? The question followed her toward sleep. And when she woke the next morning early, before dawn, body knowing its rhythm, now she still didn't have an answer. She got up, started the fire, made coffee. Thomas came in, took his cup, stood by the window in the gray pre-dawn light. "Morning," he said. "Morning." They fell into the routine. Breakfast, work, the day unfolding the way it always did. But the question stayed with her. What am I? Not nothing, not property, not captive. But what? She was pulling weeds in the garden when she heard it. Hoofbeats. Her head snapped up, body going rigid. One rider. Coming slow this time. Not fast. Not urgent. Thomas appeared from the barn, hand near his gun. The rider came into view, sheriff's badge glinting in the morning sun. And Nayland realized with cold certainty, this wasn't over after all. Not even close. The sheriff pulled his horse to a stop at the fence line. Older man, 60, maybe past it. Gray mustache, drooping past his chin, stained yellow at the edges from tobacco. He sat easy in the saddle, hands resting on the horn, weight settled like he'd been born there. "Garrett," he said, nodded once, then looked at Nalin, studied her for 3 full seconds. "Ma'am, ma'am, not woman, not Apache, not girl. Ma'am?" The words settled over her like something with weight. Nalin straightened from the garden row, dirt under her fingernails, sweat soaking through her shirt between her shoulder blades. "Sheriff," Thomas said, voice neutral, giving nothing away. "Something I can do for you. Just checking in. Heard there was some trouble last night. 3 men, making threats. There was... They left." The sheriff nodded slowly. "Emma Crawford came by the office first thing this morning, before the sun was properly up. Told me the whole story." He shifted in the saddle, leather creaking. "Also told me you handled it without gunfire. I appreciate that. Thomas, I surely do. Wasn't planning on starting something unless they forced it. That's what Emma said." The sheriff looked at Nayland again. "You all right, ma'am? They hurt you any—" "No." "Threaten you by—" "Yes." "You want to press charges trespassing, threatening behavior. I got enough for that if you want it." Nalin looked at Thomas. He gave her nothing. No nod, no shake, just waited for her to decide. "No," she said. "They are gone. That is enough." The sheriff nodded. "Fair enough. But you should know Dockery's papers are worthless. Worse than worthless. If he tries anything like that again, you come see me. Or send Thomas. Or hell, send Emma." He smiled a little. "That woman's got more backbone than half the men in this county." "She does," Nalin said. "All right then." The sheriff gathered his reins, started to turn his horse. "Sheriff," Thomas said. The man stopped. "Appreciate you coming out here. Stating things clear." The sheriff looked at him, then at Nalin. "Like I said, heard you handled it right. Just wanted to make sure everyone understood the law." He touched his hat brim. "You're welcome in town, ma'am. Free to come and go as you please. Anyone tells you different, they answer to me. You can tell them I said so." He rode off, slow, unhurried, the way a man rides when he's making a point about not being worried. Nalin stood there, watching him go, watching the dust settle. You're welcome in town. Free to come and go as you please. Words she'd never expected to hear. Words that felt too big to fit in her chest. Thomas walked over. "You all right?" "Yes." She looked down at her hands. Dirt-caked, calloused, strong. "I need to wash before Emma comes. Emma's coming. This afternoon, to take me to Ladies' Aid." He nodded. "I'll be in the barn if you need anything." He walked away, limp barely visible now in the morning warmth. Nalin went to the pump, worked the handle. Cold water gushed out, splashing over the sides of the trough. She scrubbed her hands with lye soap, scrubbed her face, her neck, behind her ears, inside. She changed into the blue dress, the only dress she owned, brushed her hair until it shone. braided it tight, looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand. A woman looked back, not broken, not hiding, not nothing. Just a woman in a blue dress who was going to town to quilt with church ladies. She heard hoofbeats, one horse, coming at an easy trot. Emma appeared, riding side saddle on a gentle mare. She pulled up at the house, slid down with practiced ease. "Ready?" she asked. Nalin nodded. Emma had brought a second horse, already saddled, a bay mare with kind eyes and gray around the muzzle. "Can you ride?" Emma asked. "Yes." Nalin mounted. The horse shifted under her, testing. She tightened her knees, settled her weight. The horse quieted. They rode toward town, slow, easy pace, the sun warm on their shoulders. "Thank you," Nalin said after a while, "for last night. You already thanked me." "I know, but—" Nalin searched for the words in English, found them, used them. "You didn't have to come. You could have stayed home, safe. So could you." Emma glanced at her. "You could have stayed inside, let Thomas handle it. But you didn't." "No." "Why not?" "Because I couldn't hide anymore. Couldn't let someone else fight while I stayed safe." She paused. "And because I am not nothing." Emma smiled. "No, you're not." They rode in silence for a while, the land stretching out around them in all directions, empty and full at the same time. "What if they'd shot you?" Nalin asked. "What if they'd shot you?" "I'm used to—" Nalin stopped, shook her head. "No, that's not true anymore. I'm not used to anything. Everything is new. Different. Good different." Nalin thought about that, about the garden, about coffee in the morning and reading lessons at night, about having a name that mattered, about choosing to stay instead of being kept. "Yes," she said. "Good different." They reached town. More activity now than when she'd come for church. Wagons on the street, men carrying lumber for the new construction, women with market baskets, children running between buildings. Heads turned as they rode past. Some stared, some looked away. One man, older, in a good suit, touched his hat brim. Small gesture. But there. They stopped at the church, dismounted, tied the horses to the rail. Inside, the church basement smelled like dust and old wood and beeswax from the candles upstairs. 6 women sat around a quilting frame, needles flashing, conversation flowing like water. The talk stopped when Nalin walked in. 6 pairs of eyes, measuring, judging, deciding. Emma walked to the frame without hesitation. "Everyone, this is Nalin. She's joining us today." Silence. Long enough to be uncomfortable. Long enough for Nalin to feel the weight of it pressing down on her shoulders. Then an older woman, not Judith Hendricks, someone else with gray hair and kind eyes, gestured to an empty chair. "We're working on a log cabin pattern. You sew—" "Yes." "Good. We need the help. This quilt's for the Henderson family. Their barn burned last month. Lost everything. We're making them 3 quilts for winter." Nalin sat down. Emma handed her a needle already threaded, showed her where to start. The women went back to their conversation, careful at first, testing, then flowing again like she'd always been there. Nalin sewed, small, even stitches. The pattern emerged under her hands, geometric, precise. Not Apache beadwork, but the same principles applied, the same understanding of how small pieces fit together to make something larger. That's beautiful work, the older woman said. She leaned closer. Where'd you learn to sew like that? My mother taught me. Different patterns, but same. She searched for the word. Same way of seeing. The woman nodded, went back to her own stitching. I'm Martha, by the way. Martha Cunningham. Nylin. I know. Emma told us. Martha glanced up, smiled a little. Welcome to Ladies' Aid. We meet every Thursday, 2 to 4. Sometimes longer if we get to gossiping. An hour passed. The quilt grew. Conversations flowed around her. Talk of weather and gardens and children and husbands. Normal talk. Everyday talk. The kind of talk that said you belonged. Judith Hendricks arrived late. The door at the top of the stairs opened. Footsteps coming down. Hesitant, she appeared at the bottom. Saw Nalin. Her mouth tightened. But she came to the frame anyway. Sat down across from Nalin. Picked up her needle. They worked in silence. The only sound was needles pulling thread and the murmur of other conversations. Finally, Judith spoke. That stitch you're using, she gestured with her needle. What's it called? Nalin looked up, met her eyes across the quilt. I don't know the English word, she said. In Apache, it's, she said the word, let it hang in the air. It means holding together. Judith stared at her, then looked down at the quilt, at the stitches Nalin had made. Strong, even, tight. Show me, Judith said. Nalin demonstrated. Slow, clear, making sure Judith could see each movement. Judith copied it. Clumsy at first, the needle slipping, the thread tangling, then better, smoother, until the stitches matched. It's stronger, Judith said, not looking at Nalin, looking at the quilt. Than the way I was doing it. Yes. They went back to work, side by side across the frame. No more words needed. When the afternoon ended 4 o'clock by the church bell, Emma and Nalin rode back to the ranch. The sun lower now, shadows stretching long across the land. Judith Hendricks asked you to teach her, Emma said. Yes. That's something. She doesn't ask anyone for help, ever. Too proud. Nalin thought about that, about pride and what it cost, about learning and what it required. Maybe she was ready, she said. They reached the ranch. Thomas was mending fence in the far pasture, looked up when they rode in, raised a hand, went back to work. Emma left. Promised to see her next Thursday. Nalin changed into work clothes, went to the garden. The tomatoes needed picking. Always needed picking this time of year. That evening, after supper pork and beans, cornbread with honey, Thomas brought out a wooden box. Set it on the table between them. What's this? Nalin asked. Papers. From the land office in town. He opened the box, pulled out forms, thick paper with official seals. Been thinking. You said you wanted to stay. To build something here. Yes. There's land adjacent to this property. Quarter section. 160 acres. Unclaimed. He spread the papers on the table, smoothed them flat. Homestead Act says a single woman can file a claim. Prove it up over 5 years. Build a house. Live on it. Work it. Then it's yours. Legal. Your name on the deed. Nalin stared at the papers, at the words she couldn't read yet, at the official seals that meant something important she didn't fully understand. Mine. The word came out small, uncertain. Yours. Legal. Proper. Nobody can take it from you if you prove it up right. But I can't read. I can help with that. We're working on it every evening already. He paused. And I can help you file. Help you build when the time comes. But the land would be yours. Your name. Your claim. She reached out, touched the papers, rough under her fingertips. Real. Solid. How long? To learn to read well enough. A year, maybe. To prove up the land, 5 years. You have to live on it, build a house, cultivate crops, show you're making it productive. 5 years. Yeah, she thought about that. 5 years ago, she'd been somewhere else. Someone else. A life she barely remembered now. A life that felt like it had happened to someone else entirely. 5 years from now, she could own land. Have a house. Know how to read. Be someone who mattered. Who had roots. Who belonged. I want to do it, she said. We'll go to the land office next week. File the papers proper. That night she lay in bed thinking about land. About a house she'd build with her own hands. About 5 years of work and sweat and determination. Not Thomas's charity. Not his ranch. Not his protection. Hers. Through the wall she heard him moving around. The familiar sounds that had become comfort. Evidence of another person nearby who meant her no harm. She closed her eyes, and for the first time she could see it. Not just tomorrow or next week or even next spring. Years ahead. Building. Growing. Becoming something more than she'd ever thought possible. Roots going deep into Texas soil that didn't belong to her yet, but would. Would, if she worked for it, earned it, proved herself worthy of it. 3 weeks later, they stood in the land office. The clerk filled out forms in careful script. Nalin watched him write her name at the top. Nalin, just the one. No last name. No family name. Just her. The clerk looked up. You'll need to sign here. Or make your mark if you can't write. She took the pen. Her hand shook. She'd practiced this. Every night for 3 weeks. Making letters. Making her name. She wrote it. Slow. Careful. Each letter formed the way Thomas had shown her. N-A-L-I-N. Not perfect. The letters wobbled, but readable. Her name in her own hand. The clerk stamped the paper, handed her a copy. Congratulations. You've got yourself a homestead claim, quarter section, section 12, township 9. You've got 5 years to prove it up. Outside, Nalin held the paper, stared at it. At her name written twice, once in the clerk's perfect script, once in her own shaky hand. What will you build? Thomas asked. I don't know yet. She folded the paper. Careful. Precise. Like it might break if handled wrong. But I'll figure it out. They rode back. The land stretched out beside his property. Empty now. Just grass and scrub and mesquite, but not forever. Not if she had anything to say about it. That evening she started her reading lesson. Thomas set out the primer, same one they'd been using, children's book with simple words. But she was past the first pages now, onto harder words, longer sentences. He pointed to a word. Sound it out. She did, letter by letter. Got it wrong. Tried again. Got it right. Good, he said. Next one. They worked for an hour. 10 new words. Her hand ached from copying letters onto the slate. Her head hurt from concentrating so hard, but she could read 10 more words than she could yesterday. Winter came early that year. The first snow fell in late November, light dusting that melted by noon. But more was coming. She could feel it in the air, in the way the horses grew thick coats, in the way the chickens huddled together at night. Nalin stood in the garden, dormant now. Nothing growing, everything sleeping until spring. But in spring, Thomas walked over, stood beside her in the cold. "Been thinking," he said, breath fogging in the cold air. "Next spring we expand this garden. Plant some fruit trees, maybe. Apple, peach if the climate's right. We, not you, not me. We," she looked at him. "What kind? Apple for sure. Hardy. Good keepers. What do you think? Apple trees." "Yes." She paused. "I know how to prune them. Apache way. Makes them stronger. More fruit." "You'll have to teach me." "I will." The dog ran between them, barking at snowflakes, snapping at them with its teeth, getting nothing but cold air. Inside, lamplight glowed through the window. Warm, steady. Home. Nalin looked at the land beside Thomas's property. Her land now, still empty. But not forever. In 5 years there'd be a house, garden, maybe chickens, maybe more. Hers, not given, not taken, earned. She turned toward the house. Thomas followed. Inside, she hung up her coat, started the coffee. The evening routine as familiar now as breathing. He sat at the table, pulled out the primer. "Ready?" he asked. She sat down across from him. "Yes." He pointed to the next word. She sounded it out, letter by letter. Wrong at first, then right. Outside, the snow started falling again. Heavier this time, covering the ground, covering the garden, covering her land, the 160 acres that would be hers if she worked for it. Inside, the lamp burned, the coffee boiled, the dog slept by the stove. And Nalin learned to read, word by word, letter by letter. Building something that was hers. Not rescue, not charity. Choice. And for a woman who'd been dumped in the dirt like garbage 8 months ago, left there like something broken and worthless while a whole town watched and did nothing, that was everything. She looked at Thomas across the table, at the primer between them, at her hands calloused, strong, capable, holding the slate with letters she'd written herself, and realized she'd finally found the answer to the question that had haunted her. What am I? Not nothing, not property, not captive. She was Nalin, who worked, who learned, who owned land, who chose to stay, who was building a life worth living, one word at a time, one day at a time, one choice at a time. She was free. And freedom, real freedom, the kind that came from within rather than being granted from without, was worth more than all the land in Texas, worth more than anything anyone could give or take away, because it was hers, entirely and completely hers, earned, chosen, claimed, and no one, not Dockery, not the town, not the whole world could take that from her ever again. We forget sometimes in our rush, in our certainty, that the hardest thing to do is simply stop, to see someone and choose not to walk by. Nalin's story isn't about being rescued. It's about being given the space to choose. Thomas didn't save her. He offered her work, dignity, the freedom to leave or stay. Emma didn't swoop in as a hero. She stood beside someone when it mattered, knowing it might cost her. That's the frontier we still live on. Not land, not borders. The space between turning away and turning toward. Every day we pass people who've been discarded, left in the dirt. We tell ourselves it's complicated. It's not our business. Someone else will help. But what if we're the someone? This story, inspired by the Western tales of quiet courage, was created for your reflection and comfort. It does not condone, encourage, or promote violence or harmful behavior. All characters and events are fictional, born from imagination. Any resemblance to real persons or events is purely coincidental. But the choice to see someone's humanity, to offer a hand without strings, that's real. That's ours to make. Sometimes the bravest thing we do is kneel in the dust and wait,